Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and welcome to Patriot Radio, broadcasting live from deep inside the heart of the future Liberty State. Brought to you once again by On Fire Ministries, in the legacy of Dr. Stan Monteith, bringing you the story behind the story and the news behind the news, where it's not about right or left, it's about right and wrong. It's about our hope not being in man, but in Jesus Christ. About not ending in prayer, but moving to action. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Father, deliver us from the evil one.
Welcome to Patriot Radio.
Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and today on Patriot Radio, as we predicted over 3 years ago, first it was going to be Russia and Ukraine. We called that almost to the day. And now, war in the Middle East between Israel and Iran. Also, the longshoreman strike hits U.S. supply chains, and North Carolina and Tennessee left to fend for themselves, but a good news story out of that. And our guest today, Alex Newman, to talk about the UN Pact for the Future and also what is going on globally. Here at Patriot Radio, we want to bring you the most accurate information, fast, so that you and your family can be prepared for the times that are ahead and indeed the times that are already upon us. And if you missed it today, follow us on Telegram, subscribe to us on Rumble. On Telegram today, we had real-time intelligence updates. We had the launch of the Iranian missiles to Israel within 30 seconds, way before other outlets. So again, follow us on Telegram for real-time intelligence analysis and breaking news. If you want to support two great causes, always remember you can support Patriot Radio and Epoch Times using the promo code Patriot Radio. And for your health needs, you can go to zstacklife.com/Patriot Radio as well. It's good in these times that we draw truth from the right sources. And that's the purpose of partnering with great organizations like that. Which brings us now to the Bible. It's going to be a little bit longer than maybe you're used to, but it's the Word of God. Isaiah 54:17. No weapon that is formed against you will succeed, and you will condemn every tongue that accuses you in judgment. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their vindication is from me. Next week, I will break a news story regarding yours truly and that passage. But today, we're going to focus on Israel and the Middle East, which brings me to Psalm 91, because it's not just for Israel, it's for the United States, Christians around the world. And I'm going to read this entire psalm, and I want to tell you just personally why this is important. Before I crossed the line with my men from Kuwait into Iraq, I handed this psalm out, and we all read it together. And as we did, all of us, save one out of thousands of combat missions with that unit, made it home. This is a promise from the Lord for all of us in this time. And it begins with this: one who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will lodge in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. For it is he who rescues you from the net of the trapper and from the deadly plague. He will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you will take refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and a wall. You will not be afraid of the terror by night, or of the arrow that flies by day, or of the plague that stalks in darkness, or of the destruction that devastates at noon. 1,000 may fall at your side and 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not approach you. You will look on only with your eyes and see the retaliation against the wicked. For you have made the Lord my refuge, the Most High, your dwelling place. No evil will happen to you, nor will any plague come near your tent. For he will give his angels orders concerning you to protect you in all your ways. On their hands they will lift you up, so that you do not strike your foot against a stone. You will walk upon the lion and the cobra. You will trample the young lion and the serpent. Because he loves me, I will save him. I will set him securely on high, because he has known my name. He will call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will rescue him and honor him. I will satisfy him with a long life and show him my salvation. What we are seeing happen in the world right now is the outbreak of a wider war. But we can rest in the shadow of the Almighty in this time. And as I talk today about what is happening in current events, keep in mind that where there's great darkness, there is also great light. And that brings us now to your daily intelligence briefing. Coming to us from the China front. Alarming and unexpected. Chinese missile ship chases civilian vessel in West Philippine Sea. Chinese missile vessel chased a Philippine vessel near the First Thomas Shoal, or Bulig Shoal, in the West Philippine Sea last week, which is considered the first time that such a ship chased a civilian vessel during its maritime patrols. Also, an infographic here showing Chinese activity around Taiwan through September 2024 that very clearly looks like a massive uptick. We're going to see what happens here in the next few weeks in October. And that brings us now to the Middle East front. Iran attacked Israel earlier today using hypersonic Fatah missiles. According to several reports, there were 180, maybe even over that, missiles that were fired at Israel. A couple of things that I want to mention here that are quick analysis. Okay. Tomorrow, there is supposed to be a Ring of Fire eclipse. Today is Rosh Hashanah, or the Jewish New Year, or the Feast of Trumpets. Now, interestingly enough, last year on October 7th, there was an attack on Shemini Asteroid, or the Day of Eternity. And today, Iran strikes Israel on their civil New Year. Benjamin Netanyahu released a statement saying that the Islamic regime in Iran has made a serious mistake. Several advisors and other officials are saying they will retaliate, and that retaliation will likely come tonight. The Israeli Speaker of the Knesset, Amir Ohana, in a post directed at the Ayatollah Khomeini, well, he made the first direct threat toward him by saying, quote, "Say hello to the end." Iran, in return, warned against any direct military intervention in support of Israel, clearly aimed at the United States. And we'll explain here in just a couple of minutes what that intervention was. But interestingly, Turkey weighed in. Recep Erdogan, the wannabe sultan or next caliph, said Israel will be stopped sooner or later. Is this the very much prophesied war in the Middle East that Turkey will be involved in? Here is what God did today, though. Despite all of those missiles being launched at Israel from Iran, and despite overwhelming the Iron Dome defense system and also U.S. anti-missile capability, and despite the fact that some of those missiles actually struck in residential areas in Tel Aviv and other places, there was only one reported death. The sole casualty, reported death actually, there was one more casualty in another country. The sole casualty of the Iranian ballistic missile attack was a Palestinian man from Jabalia, Gaza. But also, wreckage and debris from an Iranian long-range missile landed near the Jordanian capital of Amman, with several casualties being reported in the north of the city. There were no deaths reported. And so you heard that correct. An Iranian missile, or at least its debris, struck Jordan. It's going to be interesting to see what they do. On the heels of this, immediately Iraq, Syria, and Jordan closed their airspace. And Israel began very quickly opening an air corridor. Looks like today's strikes by the Israeli Air Force in southern Syria may be an attempt to create a pathway through Syria towards Iraq and possibly even Iran. Map of 4 targets bombed today by Israel in southern Syria. Following that missile attack I was just talking about, does look like they're trying to make an air corridor toward Iran right now. Just, I'm going to take a step back again. Militarily, when there is a new moon, that is the best time to strike, although most people will say, well, yeah, but there's such advanced IR and such advanced thermal and night vision technology that it really isn't the best time to strike. Well, it's so interesting. It is a dark night there in the Middle East. The Arleigh Burke guided missile destroyers USS Bulkley and USS Cole fired roughly a dozen interceptors at Iranian missiles launched toward Israel tonight. So that was a direct intervention on behalf of Israel. The White House has said that Iran will suffer severe consequences. Very interesting, especially since there are ties with certain advisors directly to Iran, and some even to Iranian intelligence. Seems like that might just be words. We will soon see. But you cannot discount this fact. There are hundreds, and I'm going to say there are thousands of terror cells inside the United States right now. We cannot discount the fact that Unit 910 and that Hezbollah sleeper cells inside the United States of America may activate as part of this retaliation. Be on your guard. Be vigilant. Exercise your Second Amendment right, but be trained in how to use that. And here's the point. What is happening in the Middle East can very quickly come to our doorstep here. And in fact, there was a terror attack in Tel Aviv just before those missiles were launched. Some reports are 6, some reports are 8 people were killed as part of that attack. Shots were also fired near the Israeli embassy in Stockholm today. And the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, a coalition of Iranian-backed paramilitary groups in both Iraq and Syria, has now stated that they will launch attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq and across the region if the United States participates in an Israeli attack against Iran. Well, it depends on how you define that, I suppose. But if the White House is saying that they're going to help and that Iran will suffer serious consequences, we're now on a trajectory that is war in the Middle East. And this is effectively a declaration of war by Iran on Israel. So tonight, there is a scripture that says that Persia is obliterated. We don't know what's going to happen tonight, but I guarantee you the Israelis are looking at targeting right now of Iranian nuclear sites, Iranian military bases, and even the Israeli Defense Ministry, the Iranian Defense Ministry in downtown Tehran. And the Iranians are looking, as they have said, at targeting Israeli military and intelligence sources. And in fact, one missile actually landed right near the Mossad headquarters. So this is war. Now, whether the two sides ratchet down like they did in April, it does not look like that's going to happen. And to back that contention up, the stock markets, some of the predictive markets right now look like they're predicting war. I'm going to tell you what you can do going forward. But also today, Israel launched a ground invasion of Lebanon and has now put a closed military zone on the border with Lebanon with communities in the southern part of Lebanon. And the Israelis have admitted as of today that there has been an ongoing special forces incursion into Lebanon over the last few weeks that has been successful. This is war in the Middle East. The United States is very close to being drug into a war with Iran. We're going to look at breaking news at the end of this as well, but we're now going to move to the Russia front. Russia says Israel must immediately withdraw troops from Lebanon. So could Russia be pulled into this? That's fascinating. But even more fascinating, I think, is a governor here in the United States of America, Governor Mike Dunleavy, who said in Alaska's news source, these violations are going to just keep happening. Our military is repeatedly forced to respond to Russian and Chinese incursions off Alaska, yet Washington, under Biden and Kamala Harris, still fails to grasp that these adversaries are ramping up their presence in the region, and we need increased U.S. military investment to safeguard our people and resources. Yes, we do. And that brings us to the national front. Gold is back to all-time highs as missiles fly in the Middle East and stocks slide. Well, stocks are sliding because they're predicting war, and also you have some of the other things that are going on right now, which is North Carolina and the longshoremen strike. So we're going to get to those two things right now. Virtually every single aircraft currently running missions in North Carolina is privately owned. The few that aren't are owned by states other than North Carolina. And as Ann Vandersteel so correctly put, you have the town of Asheville, 100,000 residents that's predicted to have no food or water for 2 weeks. Only one route in. No trucks are dropping off food, water. There aren't trucks anywhere. A massive surge of dried goods, formula, baby supplies need to be delivered there ASAP. People are running out of gas. And also, and this isn't being reported everywhere, in North Carolina, one of the key manufacturers of dialysis equipment is underwater right now. So that's going to have an effect on medical supplies for those that are that have dialysis treatment on a regular basis. There's been, quote, a total stand down of law enforcement. The mayor of Asheville is saying nothing, diverting every question with platitudes and doing nothing. No one is wearing a uniform anywhere. And then you have a sheriff who has reported that, and I mean, this is kind of an incredible thing, that people should walk without their safeties on, armed, because there are so many looters. Incredible what is happening down there. But here's the good news story. I've contacted friends on the ground there, and they're saying people are coming together amazingly without the government's help. They're coming together, helping each other, even though some of the roads are out, some of those mountain towns, totally devastated. And very likely thousands are dead because there's report after report from local law enforcement that there have been bodies they've had to leave. These are fellow Americans. Now, I know there's been a huge rush of people to help there in North Carolina. And, you know, it shouldn't be that way under the current regime, but it is. And Americans are helping out and coming together. And I think that that is just a cautionary tale for all of us that ultimately we can't depend on the government. We just have to depend on each other. Come together as Christians, be a blessing to each other in an emergency, and not rely on somebody riding in on a white horse to save us. And that brings us now to this port strike. There are two things going on here. You've got workers at the ground level, where companies are now going against agreements they had already made not to automate, and now they're automating. So you've got workers who want an opportunity to fairly negotiate contracts and then have the companies abide by their contract. These are globalist companies, most of them. These dock workers, though, are being led, really, I think, down a bad path. And I'm going to tell you why. Because since the 1970s, there has been a communist plan just before a global conflict to cut the supply chain through the Longshoremen's Union and cripple the United States. The union is demanding a 77% increase in wages over a 6-year contract. The strike could cripple the economy. It's official. 45,000 port workers are now on strike. We will cripple you, says the head of the union. And so you've got this complex mix. This would not happen if Trump was president, where the workers want to do something that is right and go against automation, fairly negotiate the contract. You have leadership, maybe under the influence of something else. 1.2 million metric tons of bananas come in through these struck ports, representing about 1/4 of the nation's bananas, for example. Holiday-related goods are also likely to be affected. Disruption of supply chains on the national level will likely catch the attention of voters in the presidential election. Well, that's obvious as well. But here's the part about it, I think, that I think we miss. We import so much from China. We're on what's called a just-in-time logistics system, 72-hour string. So that combined with war in the Middle East, combined with what's happening in North Carolina, Tennessee, and Florida as a result of Hurricane Helene, and also the other tropical storm that came through there as well at the same time. The fact that we have Americans right now who are trying to fight off looters and who are trying to provide for themselves and their neighbors. This is a created chaos and a polycrisis. We talked about this months ago that this is where they wanted to go, and they're not done. Some of this is being, slow walked as far as relief efforts are concerned, a port strike to cut off our supply chains, Russian and Chinese incursions into Alaska with a failure to really move anything of significance militarily up there to counter. China pressing it in the South China Sea near Philippines. Iran striking Israel. And then you have the war in Ukraine, which has taken not just our stockpiles down, but has also taken the money that could go to places like North Carolina and Tennessee. All of this happening at one time, and they're not done. And oh, by the way, I didn't even mention yesterday the outage regarding Verizon that's been very suspicious. Now, there's a whole bunch of competing reasons that are there. The fact of the matter is we've been talking about the fact there will be cyber disruptions and cell disruptions leading up to the election, and these things are actually happening right now, real time. So, that brings us next to the local front, where, and I love what the Idaho Tribune has been doing, but this picture to me says it all. The longshoremen have only been on strike for 12 hours, and Costco in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, is already out of toilet paper. Look at this. Prepare while you can. And that's going to bring us to the last 3 minutes here in the briefing. What can you do right now? Don't be a panic buyer. And I know the theory that toilet paper is civilization. I got that. But here's the point. Have 2 weeks worth of food and water stored up. Be ready to be a blessing to people in a crisis. And top your tanks off tonight for your vehicles. There's no panic in that. Just be wise. This port strike is likely to last for a little bit of time. But also, we don't know what's going to happen tonight with Israel's retaliation. So, take some time tonight. Go through your supplies, go through your food stores, go through your water stores, and try to at least get to 2 weeks supply of food and water have a little bit of cash on hand. And by the way, some of the reports now out of Asheville, North Carolina, are that things that didn't help. Debit cards didn't help. Electric vehicles didn't help. Because when the power goes down, so do all the machines that process those things, and so does your car if you can't recharge it. So why I'm bringing this up is being wise here right now. If you've listened to Patriot Radio for any period of time, you know that we have been talking about preparedness for years. So make sure you've got at least 2 weeks of food and water. Make sure you have a little bit of cash on hand. Make sure you top your tanks off tonight. No panic. Just make sure you can be a blessing to people in a crisis. Matt, we're in Spokane. Why? What's happening in the Middle East, like I said, can spill over to the United States. There are thousands of terror cells inside the United States right now. And part of this retaliatory strike against Israel involved on-the-ground terror attacks in Stockholm, Sweden, and also in Tel Aviv. They're now threatening the United States. And we can see this very quickly disintegrate. Now, some breaking news. Crown Prince Pahlavi Reza, or Reza Pahlavi actually, calls on the Iranian armed forces to defect and join the national revolution against the Islamic regime. So now the Crown Prince. So you're unaware of Iranian history. The Shah of Iran was deposed by an Islamic revolution in 1979. His son is calling on the Iranian armed forces to defect and join the national revolution against the Islamic regime. He emphasized that Israel and America are not Iran's enemies, but only the Islamic regime is. So this is going to be interesting to see because remember, over the last 2 years, there have been protests, widespread protests across Iran. In fact, some of the morality police stations were sacked. Some of the morality police were attacked, injured, probably killed. We don't know for sure because of the reporting out of that very closed country. So the fact is, we could see something happen in Iran regarding destabilization as well here in the next 24, 48 hours. All right. I'm going to check real quick on one other thing here. Briefly. All right. Looks like that is it for the breaking news. If something happens before the end of the show, I will make sure to bring you up to date as it happens here on Patriot Radio. And that is the briefing. Remember, the antidote to dependency and socialism is to be a God-fearing, self-reliant, freedom-loving American. Again, follow us on Telegram for real-time intelligence, analysis, and breaking news. Make sure also, if you have the opportunity, subscribe to us on Rumble. I hope your comms equipment is also up. I'm going to take a moment and talk about radios very quickly. If you don't have the ability to receive communication, news, etc., if the power goes out, then you're also in quite a quandary. The very least, you should have some kind of single sideband radio that you can receive news reports. One of the best out there is a Texan. You can buy a Sony. But it's good to have one of those so you can at least receive information, understand what's going on around you, even if the power goes out. I find right now that, especially here in the world, that the community of radio operators and networks is one of the best sources of information in a crisis, especially when the normal communications systems start to go down, like cell phones and the internet. And it looks like there's a couple other things coming in right now. Just a second real quick. Wow. Yeah, again, it looks like, according to the breaking news coming in right now, that Israel is in fact going to launch a retaliatory strike tonight You never know, because sometimes they'll say that, then wait and try to catch people off guard. But the fact is that it looks like they're meeting about it right now and discussing targeting. So, all right. We are going to get Alex Newman on here very, very quickly. Before we do, though, it does look like the shelter-in-place order for diplomatic staff and employees at the U.S. Embassy in Israel has been lifted. In Jerusalem, also, there's a new wave of Israeli airstrikes on Beirut. Looks like they may be targeted airstrikes and they're trying to take someone out. It also appears that during these meetings in Israel right now about what to do as far as retaliation, a senior Israeli security official has reportedly urged the defense establishment to target the Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei in response to the ballistic missile attack. So just a few things that just came in as we're talking right now. All right. We'll bring you more as we get it. And now to our guest. Alex Newman is the senior editor of the New American Magazine. He's also the founder of Liberty Sentinel and very, very busy on a lot of talk shows recently because he just came back from the UN Summit of the Future, for the future, by the future, whatever they are. They're trying to do something. At least it's not Agenda 2030 anymore. It's Agenda 2045. Anyway, Alex, great to have you on again.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me, Matt.
So let's start with what's happening in the world right now. It does look like the war in the Middle East is going to expand here in the next 72 hours. What's your take on this? What are you hearing from your sources?
Well, thanks again, Matt. And I've suspected that this was going to become a broader war for a long time. And in fact, being at the UN General Assembly over the last week, you could see things heating up. When Prime Minister Netanyahu went up to speak, you had a huge number of delegates walk out of the room. We actually posted some footage of that on my X account, and just huge numbers of people, a lot of Islamic country delegates, a lot of delegates from African nations just got up and walked out of the room. And, you know, I've been suggesting for a long time that this was going to broaden into a bigger war, and it looks like that may happen. Of course, Israel can't just sit back and allow hundreds of intercontinental ballistic missiles to land on their soil without taking action, so they're obviously going to have to do something in response. Of course, they've crossed the border into Lebanon now, and now they're in Gaza. So this is going to be a multi-front war, and I am very concerned about the prospect of this becoming even broader than just a regional war. We're already sending huge amounts of military assets over there, as you know, Matt. In fact, some of our National Guard troops who should be helping dig people out of the mudslides in the Carolinas and Tennessee are now being deployed over to the Middle East. So I suspect this is going to become bigger. Same thing with Russia, Ukraine. And it looks like the globalists are setting us up for this polycrisis of doom. And you know, what I'm really, really following right now on the geopolitical front, Matt, and I know you've looked at this too, is the possibility of nuclear conflict. We know the Israelis have nukes. We don't know exactly where Iran is yet, but we know the Russians have been saying very openly over the last few weeks that they're considering using nukes on us and that it would be on our soil. So I can't find any way for this to end well.
It really doesn't look like we're headed in a good direction right now. But I know, I mean, one of the good news things is, you know, what's going on in North Carolina. Americans are coming together right now. And I want to talk about that briefly in the longshoreman strike. I will just be totally candid with you. Earlier today, I stopped and I waited. I thought we're going to have to see if these are nuclear tipped ballistic missiles. I mean, I waited for that exact confirmation or denial. So I think what you're saying is very appropriate, that we are approaching this red line right now. But also, we have this crisis in America. We have North Carolina, Tennessee, parts of Florida. It seems like they have been completely forgotten by the Biden-Harris regime.
It is pretty amazing with the amount of money that the federal government squanders on nonsense. For them to now say, oh, well, we don't really have any money left to help out the folks whose houses were destroyed, whose roads have been washed away, whose cities have been wiped off the map. Yeah, we kind of sent it all to third world dictatorships so they could promote abortion. So we also studied shrimp on treadmills. So, you know, at least we got a good return on our investment. It's disgusting, Matt. It's absolutely disgusting. But like you, I'm very grateful that Christians across the country are coming together and going up there and doing the hard work. I was supposed to be on a plane to North Carolina now, and my events all there were, of course, canceled because of the guy who was organizing it said I tried to go outside, can't get out on the roads. It's a total disaster. So it's bad. I think it's worse than people have even realized yet. But hopefully Christians will keep stepping up and doing what God has called us to do, which is serve our fellow man, love our fellow human being.
Well, let's bring up then this pact for the future. Okay, so this went a little bit underreported, but thankfully you were there and you really were the voice shining light in on this thing. We've been talking about it for months now. What is the pact for the future, and why should we even care about this?
Well, it's a monumental, we might even say a great leap forward, some pun intended there, for the globalist totalitarian agenda. And in fact, the Communist Chinese were bragging about what a big role they played in coming up with this thing, which you're not going to be surprised if you read it, that mass murdering communists were involved in writing it. But the way the UN marketed it is we're going from UN to UN 2.0. We're going from the institutions built by our grandparents to the institutions that are going to take care of our grandchildren. And so when they launched the UN, they lied, of course, but they always lie. But they told us that it was all about peace and, there's no concerns about sovereignty at all. It's just a place for countries, they meant governments, to get together and talk so that we don't fight. Well, of course, we've been fighting nonstop since the UN was created. And so I guess they gave up on that. Now they say, well, we couldn't do peace, but we're going to do education, economy, environment, agriculture, fishing, you name it. The UN wants to be in charge of it. There are so many elements to this agreement, Matt, that there's no way that we could cover them all. Some of the highlights, of course, they are openly now waging war on free speech. They committed all governments and all UN agencies to wage total warfare on misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, which, of course, is a Soviet term that was introduced into the UN lexicon by the Soviets back in the 70s. And, of course, ultimately, we know they're coming after Christians. The Swedish government came out of the closet back in 2008 and told us the Bible is, in fact, hate speech. So we know where they're going with this. It also has a very, very troubling emergencies protocol. So a little bit of background before I tell you what's in the agreement specifically. Back in early 2023, the Socialist Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, released a series of what they called policy briefs. It was part of the Our Common Future series. And policy brief number 2 dealt with emergencies. And I can summarize 27 pages of policy brief for you by saying the Secretary General determined that if the Secretary General determines that there's an international emergency, all power and authority must be vested in the Secretary General to deal with that emergency. And they say very clearly in the policy brief, all stakeholders, nations, governments, businesses, individuals, everybody will have to, it says, acknowledge and recognize the primary decision-making role of multilateral agencies, in other words, UN agencies. That was the policy brief. That was the kind of wish list. Well, what they actually got in the agreement, not quite that extreme, but it lays the foundation for it. So action item 54, there was 56 total, outlines a plan that says all governments recognize that the United Nations needs to be at the center of coordinating global complex shocks. They called on the Secretary General to develop new ways to strengthen the UN response to global crises. And so as we careen into a global crisis, don't be surprised for the Secretary General to step up and say, hey, I'm going to take charge here. I'm going to handle the coordination for all this. And if you have any questions, talk to the 193 UN member states that all gave me that mandate in the Pact for the Future that they all agreed to back in 2024.
So this is setting up the superstructure for an impending global crisis to do what they couldn't do after World War I and World War II, and that is to establish a global government.
Precisely. And as you read the document, they used to kind of say like, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist for suggesting that. Now, as you read the Pact for the Future, it says we all commit to strengthening global governance. The UN needs to be the center of this and the center of that. So now it's not you're a conspiracy theorist. Now it's why wouldn't you want the UN to do these things? Do you hate poor people? Do you hate hungry people? Do you hate peace? So that's kind of the tack that they're going. They attached 2 additional agreements to the final Pact for the Future, Matt. The Global Digital Compact, which didn't get a lot of attention, but it should have. It's monstrous. It deals a lot with censorship. It deals a lot with artificial intelligence. Actually, a Communist Chinese joint Biden Shea plan to regulate AI, make sure it can't be used by Christians or conservatives or patriots for their benefit, make sure it's used for global technocracy. They've got a lot in there. They also have a declaration for future generations, which they tacked onto the agreement. Very troubling. We're going to phase out fossil fuels, which means at least in the Western world, we're going to shut down our energy systems. The whole thing taken together is the biggest power grab that I have seen since at least 2015, when they adopted the UN Sustainable Development Goals that they called the Master Plan for Humanity. And
Antonio Gutierrez is not just your normal socialist. He was literally head of the Socialist International.
That's right. He was the socialist. And if you're not familiar with the Socialist International, ladies and gentlemen, this is the alliance of the socialist and communist political parties that govern the world. Most of the world's nations are governed by a member party of this wicked, diabolical organization. And just a not so fun fact, this group traces its lineage directly back to Karl Marx, the satanic monster who advocated genocide, the destruction of the family, the destruction of nations, the destruction of all religion. So this is an agenda straight from the pit of hell, and Guterres, of course, is running the show with it, and, of course, the deep state behind him.
So what does the Pact for the Future mean to the average American? You know, at the local level, we kind of think, it's just global stuff. It's not going to really impact me. But it actually is going to impact the average American.
It is. It most certainly is. And there's a lot of confusion about it, Matt, and that's very deliberate. You know how these people are. They know that if they spoke with clarity, people would rise up and say, yeah, that's not happening, right? And so they deliberately create this cloud of obfuscation. And so with the Pact for the Future, a lot of discussion now about what does it mean from a legal perspective. And I reached out to a whole bunch of people to ask about this. In fact, I even asked the spokesman for the Secretary General. His name is Stefan Jurek, in the middle of a press conference, who was not pleased, naturally, as you might imagine. But so I reached out to one guy. We'll be dropping this interview probably tomorrow. Dr. Francis Boyle. He is a professor of international law at the University of Illinois. He was #1 in his class at Harvard Law School on international law. He actually taught UN law at Harvard Law School. So he is like the go-to guy. He wrote the implementing legislation for the Convention on Biological Weapons, approved unanimously by the House, by the Senate, signed into law by George W. Bush, or H.W. Bush. So he knows what he's talking about. He's represented governments in international courts. He's represented international organizations. He's like one of the go-to guys. And he said, Alex, this is a treaty. Right? Forget about what they're calling it. Forget about, they're calling it a pact so that the Senate won't say, hey, that needs to be ratified by us before it is considered binding. But so he said, no, this is absolutely a treaty. You've got the heads of government, the heads of state from around the world binding their nations to this. I reached out to the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Congressman Mike McCall, and asked him. His Freedom Index score is not very good, but I asked him, hey, what do we make of this? How concerned should we be? And he said, well, it's a bad thing. It's the aims are limitless. It ignores the malign influence of the CCP, et cetera, et cetera. The Biden administration never should have done this, but at least it's non-binding. So you have one school of thought that says, well, it's non-binding, so it's annoying, it's dumb, we shouldn't pay attention to it, but it's not going to affect us. And then you have the other school of thought that says, this lays the groundwork for a total global takeover.
If it's not binding, why bring it up then? Right,
that's a very good question.
Why publish it?
Why do it?
Yeah.
Yep.
And so
it lays the legal groundwork, Matt. Like I said with the emergencies protocol, that's a really good example. Now, all Guterres has to say when he starts ordering governments and companies around is, look, this power was delegated to me by the nations of the world, by the governments of the world, really. And so if you don't like it, go talk to Mr. Putin, go talk to Mr. Biden, go talk to Xi Jinping, and take it up with them.
This kind of brings in the spiritual aspect that I wanted to go to today. You're always talking about God. You're very unashamed about your faith, especially in this time when we need to be bold like lions. Today is the Jewish New Year. It's Rosh Hashanah. It's the Feast of Trumpets. And this all happens on this exact day. Tomorrow is I'm not wanting to draw too much out of this. I just want to say up front. Tomorrow's a ring of fire eclipse seen in South America in at least one U.S. state. It does. I mean, there is this sense right now that there is something spiritual happening right now in the world, that this is a time of reckoning. How do you address that when people ask you about that?
There's no doubt in my mind about that, Matt. And I want to bring in a couple things. First of all, right before the Summit of the Future happened, which, by the way, the Pact for the Future was adopted on the equinox. It's not a meaningless day for these globalists and occultists. Your average world leader may not have understood the significance of that, but it's a very important day. for a lot of these occultists. They actually have at the UN headquarters a meditation room designed in part by Alice Bailey, the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company. So very, very clear esoteric implications here. Now, right before the meeting happened, a group of occultist weirdos, they call themselves the Evolutionary Leaders, got together at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City, another hotbed of occult activity, sorcery, witchcraft, things like this. And they actually, I don't know how much truth there is to it, but they portrayed themselves as kind of the masterminds behind all of this. Now, there may be some truth to that. They may have been, have an overinflated ego, trying to claim credit for. Right. I think there was other people involved too. But these people are very, very deep into the occult, very, very deep into this esoteric spirituality. And another interesting thing happened right when the Pact for the Future was adopted. The head of the UN Faith for Earth Initiative, which is trying to bring all the religions of the world together to march in lockstep with the UN on this global totalitarian agenda. They've become increasingly prominent. When I was in Egypt, they helped organize this absurdity where all these religious weirdos walked to the top of Mount Sinai and unveiled the new and improved 10 Commandments. So they're really coming out of the closet with this. And he bragged. He said, this is the first UN international agreement agreed to by all the governments of the world where faith and spirituality is a critical part of it. And he's right. There's a whole bunch of references to that. And all I could think about while I was at this summit, surrounded by presidents, kings, potentates, prime ministers, leaders of these organizations, was Psalm 2. I would encourage everybody to go back and revisit Psalm 2. It's prophetic. It's positively brilliant. It comes straight from the mind of God. It was written, of course, by David 3,000 years ago. And he talks about the nations raging, trying to cast off God's cords from them. He talks about the kings of the earth and the rulers conspiring or taking counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed one. And then, of course, we read that God is laughing at them. God ridicules them. God is going to speak to them in his wrath, and he is going to install his king on his holy hill in Zion. So this is not going to end well for all these world leaders who think they're going to challenge the creator of the heavens and the earth. It's not going to end well. I can guarantee it. But it's all now, I think, coming into view, Matt, and Christians especially should be discerning about these issues.
So what can we do? What should we be doing as Christians right now in our own families, in our own homes, especially on a day like today when there's so many things going on? You could look at it and be overwhelmed.
Yeah, well, I would say we start with prayer. God has called on us to put all things up before him in prayer. He's actually called on us to pray for our leaders, even if we don't necessarily agree with them or like them. And so I hope people are praying for those in authority at every level. I hope people are praying for God's will to be done. And on kind of a physical world level, I think we need to be preparing. I mean, they're telling us that they're getting us ready for a polycrisis, to quote the World Economic Forum back in 2023. Polycrisis means lots of different crises converging so that, of course, they can come in and save us from the crises they've created. So prepare yourself. We've got the strike coming. We've got the prospect of World War III on the horizon. We've got the economic issues facing our country. All of that, plus maybe what may be the most wild election in American history, even surpassing what we saw in 2020. So it would be a real good thing to be spiritually prepared, mentally prepared, and physically prepared. The FBI whistleblower who just testified last week in Congress, he closed his remarks with, hey, get a gun, get some ammo, make sure you got food to last you 6 months. Don't be unprepared. Don't be stupid. We're headed into some weird times. And I agree with him. I would also say, on this globalist front, we need to be involved in pushing back on that. Really grateful, Matt, that about 26 U.S. governors have already signed a letter saying they're not going to allow the WHO to dictate any health policies in their state. We've got states passing laws against the UN. Louisiana is Exhibit A earlier this year, passed an incredible law, signed into law by the governor, banning UN influence in their state. That's really good. We've got counties and cities passing resolutions and even ordinances resisting this. We've got 2 bills in Congress, one in the House, one in the Senate, called the Defund Act. Very similar to the American Sovereignty Restoration Act. It would pull us out of the UN, evict their silly headquarters from our shores, stop the funding. So all these things are things that everybody can be working on. Call your congressman, call your senators, call your state rep, call your state senator, and of course, get involved in your church. Right? Make sure you have a community of fellow believers to lean on spiritually and maybe even physically in the days ahead, because you do not want to be on your own, and you certainly don't want to be looking for friends and a community to be with when things get weird.
And last question, Alex, do you think Trump makes it into the White House?
I think there's a real good chance, Matt. I think the evildoers will stop at nothing to stop him. We've seen that. They tried to kill him multiple times. They've tried vote fraud. They've tried just about everything they can think of. But if God determines that he's going to be the president, he's going to be the president, regardless of what these evildoers think. And so I am cautiously optimistic that that could happen. I mean, Hillary Clinton's already warning about the October surprise. We don't know quite what that will be, but hang on to your seats. But I do think it's actually possible, Matt. I think if we had a legitimate election, it would be, you wouldn't even be talking about it. It would be obvious to everybody that if we had a legitimate election, he would be president. But I think there's a real chance he may be able to surpass all of these actions of those trying to stop him. And let's just keep it in prayer.
Amen. Alex Newman, thank you so much for joining me on Patriot Radio today. Blessings to you. Thank you for everything you're doing and for really going into the places no one else will go to shine the light in on that and bring the information to us so we can be ready and also that we can be Christians in action. Thank you for that.
Amen. Thank you, brother. It's an honor. God bless you.
God bless you too. Alex Newman, thenewamerican.com, libertysentinel.org. And we're going to end the show today with a little bit more of the breaking news that is coming out right now. Wow. That's fascinating. First Lady Jill Biden represented the U.S. during the inauguration of the new Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, a socialist. That was fascinating today. That just went underreported. I do want to mention this too, as we're coming into this. I want to explain Rosh Hashanah very quickly and the Feast of Trumpets for those of you that don't know that, because I kind of just mentioned it in passing as I was talking to Alex. So Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, is the day that they don't know the day or the hour of the exact feast. This is what it means in the Bible. It's a Jewish idiom. And so it is October 2nd through the 4th. Again, remember, sundown to sundown is how the days are calculated. So it's a little bit different than most people think. And the Jewish New Year in the fall time frame, the September-October time frame, is on Tishri 1, Tishri 1. This is the civil New Year for the Jewish people. So it starts with the Feast of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah, the day that no one knows the day or the hour. I love that because 1 or 2 days. But we do know the season. That's what's so important about that. And it was also known as the hidden day, where people were hidden from God's wrath. Very fascinating that 10 days later is the Feast of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. Then you have the Feast of Tabernacles. And the final day of the Feast of Tabernacles, and there's an argument whether it's part of the Feast of Tabernacles or its own separate day, is the Day of Eternity. And that 8th day, that was last year when Hamas struck Israel. This year, the Iranians strike on Rosh Hashanah, on the Jewish New Year. Fascinating, the timing of this happening. And today, God's people were hidden from his wrath. Not one casualty, except for a Palestinian man in the West Bank that was killed, and some in Jordan who were not killed, but were injured. But in Israel, no reported casualty. I want you tonight just to think about this. If God is moving in such a powerful way right now in the world, and evil is being exposed, many people were very much afraid of war in the Middle East. And yet Israel's enemies have been, and America's enemies have been destroyed or effectively rendered combat ineffective. These entities that were coming against America for years, Hezbollah killed Americans, taken out all in 2 weeks. So what you see happening is evil is being exposed right now and then being dealt with. So that's something we shouldn't fear. So we're going to see evil exposed here, especially in the next few weeks. And then it's going to be dealt with. And as that happens, Ask yourself this question: if God is moving so greatly right now, have I really given my life to Jesus Christ? Have I really made him Lord of my life? Not just my Savior, but Lord of my life. Is he really the one that I have given my life into the hands of? My mind, my emotions, my will, my identity, my body, my physical resources, everything. Have I given everything and made him Lord of that in my life? Ask yourself that question tonight. Tonight of any night, we should be asking that question. And if your answer is yes, I want to give my life to the Lord and make him Lord of my life, accept him as my Savior, then from the heart, just pray a repentance of sin, turn toward him and accept him as your Lord and your Savior. Pray that out loud. Pray it with your family. And then invite him in to start changing things in your life, bringing peace to your life, bringing calm and joy to your life, bringing courage to your life. Receive his love. And as you do, watch how your life changes. And in the morning, if you're already a believer, ask this question: Lord, what do you want me to do today? What are your priorities today? All this chaos happening around me, what are your priorities today? Probably isn't to go run out and buy toilet paper. Probably is to be a blessing to other people. And ask him, Lord, how do you want me to be a blessing to other people? What do you want me to do? Because in this time, we need to come together. The gossip and backbiting inside the church needs to stop. We need to come together as brothers and sisters in Christ, be a blessing to the world, to be that beacon of light on a hill. And there's still enough people here in the United States of America, still enough Christians around the world to do that. The question is, will we? Have that conversation around the dinner table tonight. This is Matt Shea. Thank you for joining me on Patriot Radio today. May God bless all of you. And he is making this generation the greatest one. The awakening is here. Keep up the fight.